LEOS, another acronym. Well, Shahed was here at NCTC's WEC. You talked about LEOS. Why don't you tell us what LEOS is? We'll have a conversation.
Absolutely. So LEOS, just for record, is low Earth orbit satellite. And at this point, we know about SpaceX, Elon Musk's company, which also goes by the brand name Starlink. Actually, just yesterday, they have launched their 5th batch of satellites, another 60 satellites up in the sky. So in aggregate, they now have 300 satellites. They are talking about a constellation size of up to 12,000 over time. And it's not only about SpaceX, there are other, players as well. OneWeb, we hear about Telesat, and then Amazon is talking about LEOS, and there is also rumor from Apple potentially entering this market as well. So, this is still a nascent market, but over time, we might see competition in the context of broadband. So we need to pay attention to this field.
What makes it different from efforts, say, 20 years ago when people were starting to put satellites up in the air?
I think the key difference is the cost. Because, if you look at the unit cost, both for the building or making the satellites, and also more importantly for launching the satellites, both of those have dramatically come down, and it will keep coming down. So that's why they can talk about those mega constellations, because right now we have roughly around 2,000 satellites up in the sky at this moment. But SpaceX alone is talking about launching 12,000, 6x satellites to the sky. That can be potentially done based on the, very dramatically lower cost figures.
And one thing you didn't touch upon, but things like light pollution and things like that, there's some actual environmental issues, right, with this many objects.
Oh yeah, those are making big noises actually, because, light pollution, and then the sky will be lit up. There is a lot of concern that, you will not be able to see the stars essentially, because the sky will be so much lit. And then another issue is the debris, the space debris, because when you're talking about that many satellites, not only from SpaceX, multiple LEOS providers, what will happen to the debris? So a lot of concerns.
But these are happening. The regulatory approvals there, and obviously they're launching and so forth. So from an operator's perspective, if you're an NCTC member, what should they be concerned about?
Absolutely. So yes, if you were asking us this question maybe 2 years ago, we would be probably a little bit more skeptical. But as of today, as we see things are happening, it's not, as I mentioned during my presentation as well, it's not a pipe dream anymore. Things are happening. So in terms of what we should be looking at, we should expect that SpaceX at least, and maybe OneWeb as well, will be launching service by end of this year in the US. Maybe with very small market share at this point. But over time, in 5 years' time, or even 5 to 8 years' time frame, these guys, if they survive, of course, there's a big question, then you can expect them to play hard in at least for a subset of your subscribers. So in that sense, especially for the rural markets or the unserved markets, they have a higher potential to go hard after those markets. Many of our members, our cable industry players, are playing in those markets. So especially for the context of LEOS competition, I would say those rural / less densely populated markets will be sort of at risk to some extent.
Oh, I really liked your analysis. You showed, the numbers that you've done. I think it was like 5 to 75 home type per mile would be a sweet spot for them.
Absolutely, and that's because LEOS will be similar to the terrestrial wireless deployment. They will come with a certain capacity for a given area of interest. I showed a cell size of 20 square mile. So then the question becomes, how many subscribers you can serve within that area of interest. And if you're talking about Manhattan type area, like very densely populated, you cannot have that much limited capacity, divided across many subscribers. But if you're talking about the rural-ish areas, then you have the potential to kind of offer service at a higher data speed, because you are not dividing it into that many subs.
And the other factor makes this different than the GEOS type thing is that latency, right?
Absolutely. So I think that's the key angle they are coming from, because I showed in the slide that GEO today's satellites are roughly talking about up to 600 millisecond round trip latency, whereas the LEOS guys, at least on paper, they're saying that they can enable 25 millisecond round trip latency, which is on par with today's terrestrial broadband.
So I guess we'll start seeing the impact, how it's going to be marketed and that sort of thing towards the end of this year, or June of this year, right?
Yeah, actually SpaceX mentioned that once they have 720 satellites, which will take them 12 launches, because 60 per launch, so 12 launches, out of which 4 are done, so 8 more. So once they have 720, they are able to start offering service. That's their plan. So that means we can actually see SpaceX offering service in the country by end of this year.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. But in the meantime, there's fixed wireless broadband, and that's both an opportunity and a threat, I suppose, to some of these operators.
Absolutely, because especially if we are talking about more spectrum choices. Traditionally we talked about 2.4 or 3.5, 5.8, but now we are throwing CBRS into the mix. We are throwing maybe potentially C-band at some point. We also see millimeter wave-based deployments, both licensed and also unlicensed, which is 60 gigahertz that Telegraph Facebook is doing. So with that many options, there's no reason why our members or NCTC members can't also play into the same space. So it's not only a threat. It can be both as a threat or an opportunity, especially if you want to expand your network, your footprint beyond your current footprint.
Yeah, kind of create a wireless moat maybe around your fiber castle. Huh?
Yeah, that's something like that.
And that castle is needed because you also have the emergence of mobile broadband cord cutters, right?
Absolutely. So because mobile is another threat. But one thing to keep in mind, I also touched that in my presentation, which is these telcos. Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, Sprint. They talk about fixed wireless access, but they always have higher interest for their mobility business because that's their kind of the top priority. So the revenue yield per gigabyte is much higher for the mobility side than with the fixed side. But having said that, if they have unused or abundant capacity in certain markets, again presumably in the rural/suburban markets, then they might deploy some of those resources for fixed wireless access type applications as well.
And so I suppose the one thing that in your analysis was kind of kind of looking at today's demand, but the reality is that it seems like demand keeps going up for bandwidth, so that's going to change the dynamics of a lot of this too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Actually, we couldn't, for interest of, constraints of time, we couldn't talk about that a lot. But you're right. If we see new use cases, new applications, more bandwidth-hungry applications, that will actually work in our favor. Meaning, mobile might catch up to some extent, but if you have higher bandwidth applications over time, then there will be this catch-up game all the time. Because mobile then have to shoot for higher goals.
Yeah, it's like a race where the finish line keeps getting further and further away. So that which is a good thing. So Shahed, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ken. Pleasure.